Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Bonjour.
Thank you for coming down on this slightly chilly November day, but it's very important November day, which we are commemorating this afternoon. The 24th of November, the first night of the Bristol Blitz, a night which changed the face of the city forevermore. We have been this year very lucky to be able to introduce the public to what is the biggest air raid shelter in the city centre, which has been lying hidden beneath the Corn Exchange until now, really. So anyone who has yet to see that space, we will be taking tours Thursday, Friday, Saturdays at 11 o'clock. It is a complete time warp and hidden gem, and would have been the safest place to be 83 years ago. So we have an afternoon jam-packed with wartime activities. Blitztime Sally is about to take this microphone. But first of all, I'm going to hand straight over to the Lord Mayor, who's been kind enough to join us also, and he's going to say a few words. So thank you all for coming.
Hello, Bristol. Oh, yeah. I'll just wreck the joint while I'm here. I'm glad that I've not been introduced as Blitz Time Sally. I've been called a lot of things over the last 11 years, but Sally's not one of them. This is a fantastic asset to Bristol. A special thanks to all those that have rocked up in period costume.
Hey.
Very well done. I'm not sure what period my costume is, but I know somebody who can tell me. About 1400. So nice try, all those in period costume. I've top trumped you. I'm not going to keep you very long. 83 years, you've waited long enough to have a tour like this. Because I'm very keen to see this myself. So shall we get on with it? Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you, Lord Mayor. So for all the councillors and the mayor, we're now going to head to the top of Corn Street. So welcome everyone to the St. Nicholas Market and Air Raid Shelter walking tour. Today we are going to have a compressed tour focusing on the Blitz. The public tour, which you're all welcome to join, covers 1,000 years of Bristol history. We're obviously in the centre, the bullseye of Bristol. So we have Saxon origins in Castle Park. We obviously have all the triangular trade related history. We have the 1960s rock and roll when the Corn Exchange had another fabulous period in its life as a major music venue. But we're not going to talk about any of that today. Come on the public tour and find out more. Free tickets all round. It really is fabulous. However, we are concentrating on the Blitz because today, of course, is the 24th of November, the first night of the Bristol Blitz in the city and the first of 6 major raids which Bristol suffered during World War II. But Bristol suffered 72 raids overall, 6 major ones during what was known as the Blitz. But the 24th of November it was so significant for this city because it changed the face of Bristol forevermore. The main strategic target in Bristol was the aviation out at Filton. But the 24 targeted what was the old town. And few people, even Bristolians, realised just how densely packed Castle Park used to be with buildings. During the public tour, I would have preambled through the fact that the crossroads behind us was the focus of the medieval town with our high cross, but we're not talking about that today. I'd have skimmed through the fact that we have a photoshopped image here showing our high cross as it would have been in front of another iconic building from Bristol's past, which no longer remains, our Dutch house. But yeah, the high cross had been removed before photography had been invented. So this is a bit of a cheap photo. But here's a more impressive image of our Dutch house. Iconic structure from the city's past. You can locate where the Dutch house was by the curvature of this top of this building, which the barber shop now is situated within. So we're looking diagonally across the road. And few people, even Bristolians, as I mentioned, realised how densely packed the old town was. You'd have had High Street stretching up to the Dutch house on the corner, packed full of small shops, restaurants, pubs. Wine Street stretching behind with huge department stores and theatres. Dolphin Street heading in from the north. Mary Laporte Street, which still exists between these two post-war buildings. It's fenced off, but this street is still in place. You'd have had Bridge Street running along the waterfront. You would have had Castle Street, the main shopping street in the city, cutting straight through the centre. You would have found 5 theatres, a school and a hospital in what is now Castle Park, all now gone, bar the ruins of St Peter's Church and Mary Laporte Church. All of that was lost on the 24th of November. If you were to look across this street on the 25th, this is what you would have seen. Our poor Dutch house looking a mess. And this devastation continued for half a square mile out towards Old Market. Here we have a view looking down Wine Street behind, showing the Edwardian pre-war architecture and how different it is to the present day. And here we have Wine Street the morning after. Utter devastation. These, in fact, are Bristol Auxiliary Fire Service officers, and if any of you have a particularly acute knowledge of wartime uniforms, you may have noticed that I'm wearing a Bristol Auxiliary Fire Service officer tunic, as proven by the buttons. 20 quid. couldn't believe it. I'd wear it all the time. But this has been in the city since the war. And it's most definitely made for weather like today. During the summer, it's not so appropriate. But this was late November. I've seen images, portraits of these fire officers with icicles hanging from their helmets. This was a cold, hard winter. And whilst this image is in front of you, it's worth swiveling around for a second and taking note of the beautiful Victorian Georgian architecture which survived. It really is miraculous, as if a force field stretched up High Street, down Broad Street, protecting these buildings further west. Of course, there wasn't a force field. Buildings this side of the city were hit. The Corn Exchange was hit. Park Street was flattened. But it is a miracle that St Nicholas Market survived. The thinking behind this raid was that the Luftwaffe were trying to lower the morale of the city. They were trying to break Bristol's spirit, take out the fun stuff, the shops, the theatres, the restaurants. Obviously, it did not work. And we've all heard the term Blitz spirit, I presume. If you were to Google Blitz spirit, this may as well be the image which comes up. It's not the image, but it may as well be. This, in fact, is a chef from Jones's department store on Wine Street. Jones's was a huge store, so big it stretched the whole block back to Mary Laporte Street, and this in fact is Mary Laporte Street. We can locate it by the bridge, and I'll show you a photograph later on of Mary Laporte Street before it was hit, showing this same bridge. Now, images like this were staged occasionally by the government for propaganda purposes to raise morale. However, I don't think this is a fake image. The main reason I don't think this has been staged is because this air raid was covered up. All that was mentioned in the press was a town in the west was hit last night. a play of the same name was later written. There is an interesting film on YouTube which shows Churchill waving from that window above the registry office entrance to Bristolians in Corn Street below. And if there was sound attached to that video, you wouldn't hear the crowd cheering. Churchill was booed when he visited because the population thought the city had been forgotten. So why would you make a propaganda shot for an air raid you're trying to cover up? Well, the population thought the city had been forgotten. As we were discussing earlier on, the government didn't want to cause panic by letting people know that A, Bristol had been hit so hard, and B, that the raids were coming further and further inland. But Churchill was booed. But yes, so why would you make a propaganda shot of a raid you're trying to cover up? I think this is a genuine bit of Blitz spirit, Bristol style, and I love how pristine his whites are, razor sharp that creases down his arm. That's the way to do it. And there's someone
Give
pointing.
that man a 5-star high.
Well, as someone pointed out the other day, he's probably trying to make a bob or two in reality, but there you go. So we can stick with World War II for a second longer. If you swing round this direction and face Broad Street, you'll see the Grand Hotel. The Grand Hotel, incidentally, built in a style of architecture called Bristol Byzantine style, which comes over from Venice. Essentially, architects looked at Venice, thought they've got a lot of water, we've got a bit that'll do with the architecture. So you find a lot of Venetian-inspired buildings around our waterfront. And if you've been to Venice, travelled along the Grand Canal, seen those huge palazzos, they often have this overhang at the top to provide shade for the inhabitants from the intense sunshine in Venice. Not such a crucial innovation here in Bristol, but there you go, that is the Venetian design. Keeps the rain off as well. But yeah, the Grand Hotel has some fascinating history to provide, not just for Bristol, but for the whole of the nation relating to World War II. Because the Grand Hotel was the check-in for Bristol City Airport. Bristol City Airport was the only civilian airport operating out of the country and had flights going into Portugal. So yeah, you'd come here to be driven out to Whitchurch to fly over to Portugal. Portugal itself was neutral during the conflict. So it was into Portugal that some of our politicians, our diplomats, went in for meetings with the Allied nations, peace talks, that kind of thing. These weren't flights for holidaymakers going to get some summer sun. However, along with our politicians and diplomats, some of our undercover agents flew into mainland Europe via Portugal. They also would have had to have left from the Grand Hotel. So the Grand is our #1 spy hotel. Our real life James and Janet Bonds would have been sitting in the foyer with newspapers, holes got in them for their eyes, hats like mine, waiting for their lifts out to Whitchurch. And it really is a spy hotel. Even Ian Fleming, the author of James Bond, he flew into Portugal during the war, whilst there visited Lisbon. Whilst in Lisbon, went to a casino, came back and wrote Casino Royale. His journey began at the Grand. The most tragic passenger, however, to have left from the hotel has to be the famous actor Leslie Howard. His flight did not make it. Leslie Howard have gone with the wind fame. His flight was shot down, and there are conspiracy theories online which debate whether his flight was targeted. Leslie Howard had been very outspoken against the Nazi Party, made propaganda films for the British government, so maybe they were trying to stop him in his tracks. And there is a slightly more outlandish theory that he was on the flight with his agent, who was a dead spit for Winston Churchill. So maybe some opportunistic Messerschmitt pilot thought, oh, there's Churchill, let's go and take him out. Either way, he didn't make it. His final journey began at the Grand. But yes, indeed, so I'm used to now saying, let's head down beautiful All Saints Lane, but now instead, let's head to the shelters. Yes, we will take a group photograph. I make a bit of a point of our group photographs on the public tour because A, it's a very useful vehicle to attach a TripAdvisor link to, but B, it enables me to make my first reference and introduction to a recurring theme on the public tour. There's a few recurring themes, but one of them is Margaret. our resident friendly ghost. And I promise this has absolutely nothing to do with me recently learning some basic Photoshop skills, but Margaret has been known to appear in our group photographs. So we'll take one later, and if we're very polite, Margaret might join us. But we've got to take Margaret very seriously. So let's head down. Welcome, welcome. Yes, come through. Where we are right now is not yet the air raid shelters. This room technically was the City Valuer's bar, and it was in use as such until the 1950s, so that bar dates from the 50s. Could well have been in place during the 1940s. But the shelter complex, if you like, begins through that doorway, and when we pass through you'll notice 1940s brickwork, known as armour brickwork. There are green metal blast doors, some of which have ARP posters still in place, and that was the safest part of the shelters. Through there you also would have found the gents and the ladies' toilets, which would have been a line of buckets, not particularly pleasant, and with up to 150 people in there, I think you would have wanted to be as far away as possible. There's no way of verifying it, but this room may have been used during the lighter parts of the raids. But when the high explosives were being dropped, we would have been through there. However, as I mentioned, this was City Valuer's bar. You might have noticed a very impressive triple lock strong room door as we walk through. That's where the Valuers kept their documents relating to Bristol's past. Now, I've also mentioned Margaret for good reason. Hi, Margaret, how you doing? You all right? She's in a good mood today. What Margaret has complete control of down here until we reach museum status is the ventilation system. She's got it off right now, so I think we should take the opportunity to head through into the shelters while it's quieter. I have a period gramophone, which I'll crank up with a bit of virulin to add a bit more atmosphere, and let's take a look. But before we do so, I have to change my headgear in something more appropriate. There we go, safety first. That is Mick. He may well have propped up that bar at some point in the 60s. So, just to get your attention, quick toot on the old ARP whistle. Turn out those lights. Let's head through. Okay. Huddle into this corner now, because we really have something quite special to have a look at. So on this wall we have some 80-year-old pencil drawings, presumably produced during a raid. And there's a few reasons we can presume their age. Firstly, the overall aesthetic screams out 1940s, as does this dance move and the style of the dress. But more than that, more accurately than that, we have a name written next to this beautiful ballerina, and it really is a beautifully drawn ballerina. It looks like a Degas ballerina. We have a name here, Myrna Loy. Ring a bell. Myrna Loy was a famous Hollywood film star from the 1940s. Her career actually began in the 30s and stretched through to the 60s. Myrna Loy was also in a film called The Jazz Singer when she played a ballerina. So it is possible that an artist or someone with some serious talent was leaning against this wall as the bombs fell on the streets ahead, dust sprinkled down from the ceiling, with a wartime movie magazine and a spread about Myrna Loy and spent those fateful hours putting her portrait on the wall. The most, well, there you go. It's a miraculous connection to those fateful evenings, but also a wonderful connection to Bristol's contemporary status as the capital of the street. And maybe this is Banksy's great-grandmother starting the family tradition. I'm also an artist in my other life, and I've made a lot of sketches in cafes, sketches from life. And I recognise some of these marks. In amongst these drawings, almost the most interesting ones for me are these really loose portraits, small, quick sketches, some of which there's only 3/4 of a face, half a nose. And that tells me that they are portraits of people who didn't know they're being drawn. So presumably are other members of the public in the shelters. Just the most miraculous survivor. There are also dancers, same couple in different poses. Again, you're not going to copy that from a book. There's a gramophone down here right now. They probably would have had a gramophone down here. These could be people dancing in this very shelter. The most miraculous window.
Done by the same person.
I would say all of these images are. This might be someone on their lunch break in 1975, you never know. The quality is not consistent the whole way through, but I would say, yeah, these are done. And I would also say that's done from a photograph. These looser ones are done from life. Amazing. Also, we have a miraculous survivor up here. This is an original blast door, period blast door, with a City Engineers Department poster, fragment of a poster saying this area is strictly prohibited. Looking through here, you'll see more 1940s brickwork, reinforcing that archway. That corridor is interesting. The brick doesn't actually go all the way to the ceiling. It's open. And of course, I stuck my hand in. It's full of rubble. And I thought it might be blitz rubble. I was just interested by it. So I stuck my hand in. Literally, the first piece of concrete I lifted up had a Will's Wild Woodbine wartime packet. Literally the first thing. It's like, oh, there you go. It's on the side of the bar now. And then we got some Christmas lights. And up until October, this space was jammed full of Christmas lights, October 2022. And it gives me cold sweats to think how easily this drawing could have just been scraped off the wall or a contractor paint over it. So hopefully we have caught it before it is lost. So we'll pass you here now to this bicycle, and you can't say attention to detail has not been paid because our gramophone is also an HMV. Do you know the HMV link? Anyone know the Nipper the dog? Yes, indeed. Nipper was a dog owned by a set builder at the Princess Theatre on Park Row. Princess Theatre was, in fact, bombed during the Blitz, and there's a statue opposite the Edwardian toilets of Nipper. The set builder's brother was an artist. He did a picture of painting of Nipper, listening to the gramophone, and then flogged that to HMV, and it's been their logo ever since. And the name Nipper also has a Bristol link. The young lads that used to run up the decks of ships taking ropes and things like that were called nippers. So if you head through here, well, I can describe a few more details and talk about survivors. We have another paper poster, which obviously half of it's missing, but we can presume what the rest would have said. City and county notice, users of ARP public air raid shelter, provision of food, it's likely to have said. It's not possible for recreational mobile canteens to operate within the ARP shelter. Users of the shelter must make their own arrangements, bring with them food and hot drink. The D, which might have been Department of Food, 1940. So again, amazing survivor, as is this. That is a period paper poster. It was originally around the corner, but we brought it around here. Signed Josiah Green, Town Clerk. And if you're in the Emshed Museum, Josiah Green's signatures on various wartime signage. And I don't know how he ever got anything done, to be honest. He seemed to have just signed everything in sight. But that is an 80-year-old, 83-year-old paper poster. Now, I'll just wave my arm through here, get Margaret to turn on the lights. There's a staircase here which leads, well, it's cut off now, but it would lead straight into the glass arcade. So this was the original entrance and exit during the war. And again, you can see pencil marks still visible. Just gives you that kind of ephemeral connection with the person that put them on the wall, makes you think what was going through their mind when you're scoring up a genuine exit sign in a genuine air raid shelter in a genuine World War. Terrifying stuff. One of those staircases I call Margaret's staircase. That's my theory about how she got stuck down here. She's an early Georgian serving maid. Her route back to the kitchen's been cut off. She's trapped down here for eternity. I usually see Margaret after I've been kind of sawing some woods or I'm quite tired, so it can't be verified. But Margaret, yeah, she's happy. Interestingly though, Margaret was the most popular girl's name during the war. So maybe she's more recent. Talking of the age of the basement, of the cellars, you'll see some much older graffiti scratched in the lime plaster there. PS 1794, you might be able to just make out. So the building was finished in 1743. 51 years later, someone scratched that up. Okay, so presumably this was the cloakroom. The coat hooks are original, as is this paintwork, very evocative colours from the 1940s, the architrave, and these dado rails. I think this is a really touching detail. They're meant to be up in a house, so what do you find a dado rail and an air raid shelter for? It's got to be an attempt to soften the space, make it that little bit more homely. As I said, 12 3/4 hours was the longest raid Bristol suffered. There is a light, dimming light there by the doorway. That would have been out on the street. That's air raid shelter light shining white if it was full, white if there was space, red if it was full. You had an ID card for your local shelter. It would be a cold-hearted ARP officer.
What are these boxes here?
Ventilation, presumably.
Ventilation.
But yeah, it would have been a cold-hearted ARP officer who'd refuse entry, but there weren't enough spaces in the shelters for the population, hence Anderson shelters.
Yeah.
But this wasn't a particularly populated part of town, so who knows how many people would have wanted to come down here. Thankfully, the raid took place on a Sunday as well. Had it been Saturday at 6 p.m, all those theatres would have been full. So 207 people lost their lives, which is obviously tragic, but it could have been much worse. But most amazingly in here really is this signage. That's the original ladies' toilet sign. Unbelievable, up there for 80 years. Nature of the council business, I suppose. There's always something that needs doing. No one's ever thought, I'll go and take that signage down. The rest of this memorabilia I have instated myself. And if you're desperate for a seat, I'm not a carpenter. They should take your weight, but yeah, it's just to give it a bit more life. And the suitcases especially, you would have had a suitcase packed, ready to go with your favourite book, a pillow, so you didn't need to waste time packing it. And this is presumably an approximation of what it may have looked like. Most of these items have come from elsewhere. I've just got to point out a few though which have been here since the war. This in particular. City Values Department. I mentioned that we're in the City Values Department bar. Here is the City Values Department medics kit. I personally discovered this stuffed against the wall of the room on the left as you walk in a long while ago, pre-COVID. Yeah, there's a few reasons we can date this quite accurately. First of which, the creases in the back have been fossilised in. Maybe it hasn't moved since the 1940s. But what came within this case dates it even more accurately. Boots' own brand. So we've got Boots' own brand mine dressing, and that name comes from coal mines rather than landmines. But Boots' own brand mine dressing, and the oh so gentle sounding bleach ointment. Yeah, bit of bleach, whack it on. Not gonna sting at all, that is it? Just whack it on. Had a specific purpose for neutralising splashes of mustard gas. Civilian duty gas mask. This is for guys and girls in uniform. bit more substantial than the ones you and I would have been issued. Even came with a little telephone adapter. Boots again made the glass for these lenses. Dunlop made the rubber, and this 1939 design had the oh so well thought through asbestos filter. And that's the one you and I would have been issued with, slightly more practical, and you're in big trouble if you're left without your gas mask over your shoulder. But our new edition has been raising some gas. The kids version, which, you know, you can understand the thinking. If you're going to make a child's gas mask, make it blue and make it bright colours. But in doing so, you've also created one of the most sinister objects you're ever going to see. Gas was never used, so these were never used. These are gas rattles, not football rattles. This is stamped up ARP, air raid precaution, rather than QPR. And we all associate the eerie drone of the air raid siren, of course, with the war. Thankfully, this is not a sound we associate with those days. But that would have been ringing out. And then here we have the real terror, incendiary bombs. 12,000 were dropped over the old town on the 24th.
Real one.
This is a replica. Yes, 12,000 began those raids, and they were designed to be a real pain, get stuck in your chimney, down in your drain pipe. Yeah, and George Jones of George Jones Road, out by Bristol Temple Meads, he knocked one off the top of the gas works with his tin hat. Got the George Cross for it. But yeah, the shell casing's made of magnesium. We remember our chemistry lessons burning that magnesium strip, how violently that white flame, but imagine a whole shell casing going up. I've had someone on the tour who remembers their granddad having one of these come through the bay window in Bedminster. Granddad picked it up with a shovel, took it out to the garden. By the time he got to the garden, it had burnt through the shovel. Vicious things. So yeah, they designed to set your roof on fire. The purpose of those fires wasn't so much to cause damage. They were designed to provide targets for the next wave of high explosive bombers to yes, indeed. We have this new edition, which is yet to be described. This has been a project to recreate Castle Park. It's not quite finished, but there it is. This is the Dutch house. That's what everyone thinks of when Castle Park's described, but all of this. We've got Mary Laporte Church and St Peter's Church. This is the Regent Cinema Theatre, biggest theatre in town at the time. But this is Mary Laporte Street. And this is Bridge Street, so you've got the water coming down here. This is something, amazing thing that's been donated recently by someone who's on the tour. This is a photograph of the Hippodrome.
Oh, gosh.
That's an original photograph. The lady's uncle was the architect who redeveloped. And that is Hippodrome. That was the 24th of November as well.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, in a poignant moment as the sun sets behind me there, I stand on Castle Green, 83 years to the day, just before the bombs fell. 83 years ago today would have been the last day the centre of Bristol saw daylight. Because come 6 o'clock that evening, the German bombers appeared over that sky there behind me and proceeded to drop bombs on this place and obliterate it. And it would never be the same again.